Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining us from today on our different time zones. The beauty of these virtual programs. Thank you all for being here. My name is Nina Bzichnik. I'm a curator here at the Henry, and I'm excited that you're here to join us on the occasion of Bambitchell's new performance reading of Dolphin Ships and Other Vessels. Bambitchell, for those of you who don't know, is the artistic collaboration of Charlene Bamboda and Alexis Kyle Mitchell. Dolphin Ships and Other Vessels expands upon their ongoing exploration of the legal frameworks that govern non-human animals and objects, which is also the subject of their film and exhibition Bugs and Beasts Before the Law, which is currently on view at the Henry through May 8th and is presented in collaboration with Mercer Union in Toronto. The film is currently available to screen on the Henry's website through 11 p.m. Pacific time today. I encourage you to log on and screen it. I'm going to drop a direct link to that screening page in the chat. Bear with me. Let's see, there we go. That I encourage you to check out before it expires later today. I'd now like to offer a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is an opportunity for us to publicly recognize that we at the Henry and the University of Washington live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Squamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Today's program is being realized by people who span different geographies, and the performers and the creators would like to acknowledge the Indigenous territories that they reside on and occupy. Toronto is located within the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Tiohtià:ke is situated on the traditional territory of the Goniogehaga, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Goniogegaha of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe. This land acknowledgement reminds us of our connection and indebtedness to the peoples and the more than human kin where we live and work, and we pay respects to elders past and present. Today's performance reading culminates the Bugs and Beasts Before the Law colloquium, which Bambitchell's film by the same name inspired. The colloquium has included a series of roundtables and workshops co-developed with University of Washington faculty and centered on questions related to personhood, kinship, and socio-legal systems. And again, I'm going to drop another link into the chat for the microsite of the colloquium, where you can find a lot of archived content that from the different roundtables and events over the last several months. The Bugs and Beasts Before the Law colloquium is supported by the Simpson Center for the Humanities, and we would like to thank Kathleen Woodward, Rachel Artiega, Caitlin Palo, and the whole Simpson Center staff for their support. We'd also like to thank all of our faculty partners who contributed their time and insights to the colloquium, deepening our thinking and enriching our understanding of the ideas, histories, and contemporary relevancies elicited by Bambitchell's film. Dolphin Ships and Other Vessels continues the dialogue of the colloquium in exciting ways, and we really truly are delighted that Charlene and Alexis embarked on the journey to make this work in the space of a Zoom and to share it with us today. The performance features sound design by Richy Carey, who also made the incredible score for the Bugs and Beasts film. And the script, which is written by Alexis and Charlene, is being performed by Sukaina, Kubba, and Faraz Anoushahpour. The performance will be approximately 20 minutes long and will be followed by a conversation with the artist, during which we'll open it up to audience questions. And a bit of logistics before we get started and to optimize your viewing experience. We'd like you to go into side-by-side mode. So on the top of your screen, you see a green bar that says you are viewing Jinn's screen. Click on View Options and go down, scroll down to where you see side-by-side view and click on that. That would be the best way to experience today's performance and how the artist designed it. Also, for those of you who might not know, if you'd like to turn on subtitles, you can go ahead and do that by clicking on the live transcript closed captioning button to the far right on the menu at the bottom of your screen. And a final note, we'd like you to save your questions until after the performance when you can then put them in the chat. But we'd like to preserve having no dinging or other sort of sonic interruptions, as it were, that the function creates. So without further delay, dolphins, ships, and other vessels.
The seas join the nations they divide.
In the inhabited quarter of the earth, there are some 500 small rivers and some 200 long rivers, like the Oxus, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile of Egypt, the rivers Kura and Aras in Azerbaijan, the Helmand in Sistan, and other such great rivers, each approximately 6 kilometers long. And the lakes, seas, ponds, streams, rivulets, and creeks are without number. In every one of them live all sorts of fish, crabs, turtles, sea serpents, swordfish, dolphins, crocodiles, and other species beyond tally or count.
History reports that in 1596, an armada of dolphins burst into the port of Marseille and settled there, causing extensive damage. The cardinal, who bore the name Aquaviva, was alerted. He delegated the bishop, who came to exorcise the dolphins, ordering them not to stay put. It is written that the cetaceans took it for granted and never reappeared.
Mind the pink-hued dolphin, for it might drag you to Encante, upon which you will rupture from the emanating light.
Have you heard the complaint of the aquatic animals, and all the cattle and beasts, and their account of the injustice, oppression, and ruthless trespass they have borne at the hands of men? It is true and correct, night and day, everywhere to be seen, and hardly lost on the aware. It was for this very reason that the race of Jinn, too, fled from among man to deserts, wastes and moors, mountaintops, hills, valleys, or seashores. It is said that in this inhabited quarter of the earth, the species of mankind brutalized the animals and anything else they could objectify. When the stars were at their zeniths, the points of the zodiac were solid and square, the season was equable, and matter was ready to receive form, all those objects and animals took the humans to court before the king to seek justice.
Faraz Jack, an albino dolphin, first showed up on the oceanic scene of New Zealand's aquatic circles in 1871, accompanying passenger and cargo ships as they sailed through Te Moana-o-Raukawa. This narrow passage of water connected the North and South Islands of New Zealand and is known for being one of the most dangerous and unpredictable waterways in the world. Passenger Mary Ann Lins-Bigelow reported the sighting of Faraz Jack at 12:30 p.m. on March 30th, 1907. She reported seeing him for 5 minutes alongside the Petuna. Bigelow described the dolphin as 12 to 14 feet long, of white color, with gray lines or shadings, and a round head.
The animal delegates arrived from all their distant lands, and the king of the Jinn took his seat. A herald announced, "Hear ye, hear ye. Let all who have grievance or suit attend, for the king is seated in judgment." Present were the genie judges, jurists, and justices, jurymen, and sages, as well as the parties, human and animal delegates who had come from every quarter. Ranged in rows before the king, they hailed him with wishes of long life and felicity. The king gazed left and right, beholding the immense diversity of shapes and forms, colors, sounds, and songs before him. For some time he was overcome with wonder.
HMS Faraz invaded and captured Martinique in 1809, and the following year participated in the capture of Guadeloupe. 15 years later, Faraz was employed in the Mediterranean, protecting British trade in the archipelago, at Alexandria, and around the coasts of Syria and southern Anatolia. On December 21st, 1829, she struck a rock at the entrance of Port Mahon in Menorca, Spain, and subsequently sank.
It is said that the Jinn is a definite species of living beings, created of fire and like man may believe or disbelieve. accept or reject guidance.
A metamorphosis occurs, legal and magical. Distinctions lost between person, ghost, ship, animal. Mind at night the dolphins who turn into other beings in order to seduce. Take off their hat to reveal a clue.
Glasgow's Clyde River was home of Charles Connell and Company, a mid-sized shipping firm commissioned by the German Hansa Line to construct the Steubenhook in 1890, a steamer that eventually became the Komagata Maru. For the first 23 years of her life, she carried European settlers and sojourners from ports of call in continental Europe, along the Mediterranean, across the North Atlantic to the eastern seaboard, along the Kaniatarowanenneh River. Montreal and Ellis Island were two of her regular stops. Connell and Company was well known for its high-quality vessels, especially those constructed for the Indian indenture trade. Long after the abolition of slavery, company-built ships transported people from the Indian subcontinent to Britain's Caribbean sugar plantations. In their transoceanic crossings, the firm's ships facilitated the large-scale dispossession of indigenous peoples and the exploitation of Indian indentured laborers, all under the shadow of transatlantic slavery.
Mind your eyes, don't point with your index. Revert yourself from the dolphin with clear mind should you stave off persistent nightmares.
Faraz Jack's beloved status was only known within New Zealand. Therefore, when in 1903 a Norwegian shipping boat shot at the eager dolphin, the New Zealand government took action. Passed in 1904, the New Zealand Fisheries Act made Faraz Jack the first individual sea creature protected by human law in any country. Faraz Jack remained protected by that law until his disappearance in 1912. The Crown built many ships named Faraz.
The king called upon the Jinns, the fairies, the peasants, and all the people of the land to sit court and witness the trial. The delegate of the ships was first to speak. A ship is born when she is launched, and lives so long as her identity is preserved. Prior to her launching, she is a mere congeries of wood and iron, an ordinary piece of personal property, as distinctly a land structure as a house. Once a ship is launched downriver, she is magically transformed into a subject of law that governs the open seas. When a ship acquires a personality of her own, she is individually liable for her obligations. She may sue in the name of her owners and be sued in her own name. Therefore, your honorable king, the behavior towards the ship defies the ways of the Creator.
In 1913, the Stubenhook was sold to a small Japanese firm and renamed the Komakata Maru. It was through a translation error that the ship became the Komagata Maru. Soon after, it began a regular route transporting coal to the various ports along the South China Sea. The following year, the ship crossed the Pacific Ocean to British Columbia. Then, 2 months later, it traveled back in the opposite direction along the Pacific and Indian Oceans to Calcutta, carrying those passengers who were refused permission to disembark in Vancouver, forever altering the violent landscape of immigration in Canada. No less than 2 centuries after the banishment of the Dolphins from the port of Marseille, a priestess by the name of Marteau pulled a card from the Tarot de Marseille, predicting the return of the cetaceans to the port city. Her premonition rang true when a swarm of dolphins arrived at the shore, ready to defend the revolutionary government. 500 swam along the coast, humming La Marseillaise all the way to Paris.
Dolphin approaching on sand. Short, waddling. Mind you don't take a picture to avoid being stuck.
The king turned his attention to the delegate of man. How do you respond to this claim?
Under British common law, and in British and US maritime law, the positive personhood ascribed to the ship was tightly tethered to the negative personhood imposed on the slave. Ships had husbands and sisters and were made akin to humans. At the same time that ships were granted legal personhood, the people they transported were denied theirs, thus blurring the distinction between persons and property. Faraz had many lives. Faraz Jack was spotted by Kipahemi Firo, elder of Ngati Kuya, who reported being very positive in his belief that Faraz was the self-same fish of ancient days. HMS Faraz participated in the First Opium War, transporting opium to China in 1839. Faraz is the name for a tool that functioned somewhat like a compass, but without a directive element. It is used to maintain the bearing of a vessel at sea and is mounted on the flying bridge of a ship to permit observation of its surroundings. HMS Faraz joined the West Africa Squadron, patrolling royal coastlines after the passing of the 1807 Act for the abolition of the slave trade. Faraz Jack is also a Scottish country dance. This dance features a set of alternating tandem half reels where two people act as one, but swap who leads at the reel's end.
The oars of the ship transform. The snakeheads rattle in their form. Jump into the sea, look up at the sky, you will find the dolphins made from mankind.
Everyone in our audience, we're just going to take 1 minute here to get set up for the conversation question portion of today's program. Just give us 1 second. Great. Alexa, Charlene, welcome. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. Awesome. I'm just trying to get myself set up here. Great. I'm having a little trouble finding the chat. So if things come into the chat, maybe you all could help me field that. Okay, great. All right, I want to just say thank you again for yet again making a piece that's so multi-layered. I will have the pleasure to view it multiple times because we recorded today's performance and we'll hopefully make it available on the Colloquium microsite shortly so you all can watch it again too. so much to think about in terms of the mediation of legal personhood and the hauntings of history, as per usual with your work. So thank you again. Before we talk more, I'll hand it over to you for a minute.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Hey, everyone. Before we begin, just wanted to say thanks to some people who helped us along the way. So for sure, everyone at the Henry, Nina, Nita, and Ian, thank you so much for making this happen. And also Ian and Oliver Hussein, we want to thank for working out some tech issues with us. Zoom is very complex, it seems. We also wanted to thank Anoushahpour, Nazik Dakash, and Manar Morsi for introducing us to concepts and texts that kind of framed the research for this project. That's it for now. And obviously thanks to Alexis.
Okay. So what I'm sharing on the screen that you all can see are just going to be some images, installation images from Alexis and Charlene's show at the Henry, Bugs and Beasts Before the Law. A kind of a expansive project that maybe you are grouping today's performance under, but given that it's not in direct reference to, well, it is in direct reference to Evan's text that inspired your research ongoing around the animal trials and these ideas related to personhood that the animal trials elicited. I think that maybe a good point to start from is your ongoing interest in exploring, interrogating dominant histories by looking at more buried or under-recognized historical narrative, and how and why you're attracted to these histories for, well, illuminating truths that really live with us so presently now. How and why are you like drawn to these very intriguing, often absurd stories?
Okay, I can begin. Thanks, Nina. It's a good question. Yeah, so as you said, we've definitely been working for years on this project, specifically Bugs and Beasts Before the Law. And yeah, I think we could probably group the Dolphins, this performance trial that we just did under that heading of these animal trials that existed within medieval Europe and that spread sort of all over the world. But yeah, our practice kind of generally has looked at sort of larger societal systems, or, you know, the big ones, law, colonialism, you know, the things that continue to structure our very often very violent worlds. But we do sort of end up focusing on, and maybe it's just like kind of our personalities in a way, things that maybe people don't necessarily think of when they think of those sort of big themes. And so, like, for example, with this performance, we sort of just became obsessed with this reference in the Animal Trials book, the book that, the one single book that talks about these animal trials by E.P. Evans. There was like one reference in the appendix of the book that, I mean, it's like pages and pages of an appendix, but like on one single line, it said dolphins. And it's like, it's funny to what seems absurd once we're already like amidst that world of looking at the trials of animals, because to us that seemed absurd at that point, but like we had already been for years kind of talking about the trials of pigs and roosters and other things that like somehow at that point the dolphin seemed like something new to unearth. But it did allow us to, like, you know, I think this is sort of emblematic of how we kind of work. So we became obsessed with the dolphin, and then of course the dolphin became about everything. Like the dolphin became about the sea, of course, and about about maritime law and the laws that govern the sea. And of course, we can't talk about the laws that govern the sea without talking about shipping and ports and slavery and the routes that the sea, like the ways in which, you know, humans have utilized the sea. Yeah, so this is kind of like a long winding explanation, but Charlene probably has more to say about
Well, I
that.
just want to add to that is that also I feel like throughout our practice, and specifically with this project in researching for the film and now for the dolphin thing, we very much question like how truth and knowledge is circulated and how that functions. And so very specifically with the law in relation to this project, but in all of the research that we did, it's like law and myth and superstition and religious doctrine all sort of end up blending. And so I think with the dolphin one, like with the film, for those who have seen it, it really showcases a lot of Christian ideology and logic that was built into North American and European law. And with the dolphins, we looked very much at the figure of the Jinn, which is pan-Islamic within the Islamic world. And depending on where you come from, Jinn means different things and has different functions, but also to think about the figure of the Jinn sort of moving through like shape-shifting in a way. So becoming dolphin, becoming ship, becoming sea, and just trying to take in, again, like ideas around superstition and myth and mix it with legal frameworks and how the two often intersect, but we don't often think about them as doing so.
You mentioned a lot of things that I just want to come back to, and I think one of them is this idea of the veracity of historical narrative. And a lot of times with, at least with the animal trials, a lot of people will watch the film and they'll ask, like, did these really happen? And I think one of the interesting things about your practice is exactly what you just said. It's how events and the stories we tell about events are almost of equal import in how we understand the past and therefore how we understand the present. But with that, I'm curious how, and maybe you can talk more about how you're intentionally playing with the boundary between fact and fiction in the narratives that you're writing, but also in the sort of visual imagery that you bring forward, how you're playing with ideas of translation across media. I think one of the interesting things about this project too is the way that the archive gets utilized, and then also the way that imagery is being deployed as a way of, maybe I shouldn't say deployed, it has a very militaristic connotation, but is being used to manifest these ideas of translation, of blur, of a questioning that happens with processes of reproduction. There was a lot in that question, but I think ideas around how you, through narrative, through manipulations of your media, are working in that blurred space between fact and fiction.
Yeah, it's funny in a way because it is sort of always how we've worked. Like when we look back at our past works before this body of work, when we were talking about, like, we've made works about, you know, the Canadian legal system, or you know, things like this before, and we've always just kind of blurred the boundary of fact and fiction. But I think with this project, and we did that, you know, sort of as you were saying, because how, like the questions about, like, or as Charlene was saying, like the questions about like how we come to know something are just as important to us as like kind of presenting a like kind of fully formed like not body of knowledge, because they do tell us so much. But it's like, I think within this project, it all kind of like it came together in a way, because when we started to research, like as Charlene was saying about, when we started to do the research, like mostly for the film, we realized like how much of the law is actually myth and is formed through myth and about like that from people's anxieties and folklore and so it actually, like the law does that itself. It blurs a distinction between fact and fiction, because how do we know, what like how do we know anything? Like how can we say anything for certain in a way? But yet we formalize opinions about things all the time and then use those opinions to, create these kind of dangerous structures.
Also, to add to a little bit of the ways that we, like just jumping off what Alexis said, the ways that we come to knowledge is varied, and more so now with everything being online. And so a lot of our reference points are not just text that we read, but also images and conversations and I don't know, many different ways, many different entry points into thinking about it. And that has always shown up in our work. And I guess with this performance, because it was specifically made for an online Zoom platform, we were trying to figure out how to marry somewhat seamlessly text, image, voiceover, sound, but within the limitations of the technology itself. Because we often, I mean, most of our practice is moving image based-ish, generally speaking. And we tried to, but also realized that we couldn't exactly do what we wanted within this Zoom structure. So it was kind of like, how do you work with technology plus doing all the conceptual things we wanted to do with the blurring of what is fact, what is fiction, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like we've kind of always done that throughout most of our practice, is often questioning this idea of fact and truth, and like questioning big narratives and things like that, which I think is very, very evident when you look at the law and how the law has been structured over time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you just said, being that your practice is often rooted in moving image, which I think is, like you're saying, obviously very true. But it, to me, in the context of working on this exhibition, you've created a printed publication. You've also created this an adjacent installation that includes is rooted in like works on paper imagery. And so it's really fascinating for me, I think, to think about how what you're doing within moving image is also like very much tied to just histories of translation, like across, and transference of knowledge through material, whether it be imagery or, like you're saying, the archival record. Like there's that one entry that you play with from one of the prints in your show at the Henry, includes this idea that there was this archival document that was totally true in a transcription of a true account of a trial, that then like that original account was lost, but the person who, like, a copy of it showed up and is deemed to be the truth, and is what Evans used to base as a piece of his research. And like that notion of things that are transferred or translated across time and across place through these material records, I think is something that I'm fascinated with how you are playing with in some of these works that are, yes, in the film, but also outside of the context of the film, in these other works on paper projects, or even in, this film too, or your performance today that has these, that use these images as well. So I guess I'm curious for myself, like how you think about the use of even like a still image, analog, digital, and these ideas of translation and transference. Because you also brought it up with even language, like the boat that, or the ship's name that had a mistranslation, and like what's lost in that and that process.
That's a big question. Yeah, I think that just to stay on the little details, I feel like we like to kind of fixate on and drop them wherever we can. Often, because sometimes the mundane, which is also very much about our practice, is that these little mundane things can actually mean so much and have such big implications. And so a lot of little details get dropped in a lot of our work that feel so small, but actually like signal to big things. And I think with images, I mean, I guess the way I think about it is we're writing something, we're reading something, we make visual associations with it. And so what is that visual association? What is it? Is it something that already exists that is like found imagery, or is it something that we create? And oftentimes it's both, us mashing up found imagery with images that we create. And that happened in this dolphin performance as well, where most of the images were found images, except actually no, it was a mix of the two. The still images that were black and white that had the text on it, Alexis and I created a process. I think it started off also because feeling so isolated from each other and working on Zoom over the last year, we created these images on 35 millimeter film, filming at Glasgow Port, where Alexis lives, and Montreal Port, where I live. And then I sent my camera to Alexis, and then she hand processed them in her house. And then using those images of both the ports, which are super important to the performance and the colonial project across the Atlantic, that very much shows up in this dolphin performance. It kind of was a way, like two ways for us to create images, but also to feel somewhat connected in this very disconnected moment. And then also to have some sort of materiality, even though it ends up being digital, but just to like have something physical to actually play with and include within the film or within the performance.
There's a question that popped up in the chat, but should I tell, can you see what that is?
Yeah, I can now.
It's just saying hi.
Yeah,
So
we
I was
can
like, there's a
transition.
question.
We can, if people in the audience have questions they'd like to ask of Alexis and Charlene, yeah, please feel free to put them in the chat, and over the next 10 minutes we can address as many as we can. And in the meantime, as you're typing those in,
I also
maybe
wanted
you
to mention just one thing about like this translation thing too, and also the mixing of like text and stuff, that much of this text came from this book by Richy Samawani, and she's the one that noted this translation error between the K and the G of Komagata-Maru. And I mean, that's also just like this is, you can sort of get a glimpse into like how our sort of research process goes. Like, so we brought that story into this broader, like the story of Komagata-Maru into this narrative that starts in Marseille and, goes all over the world, because that story is so important to immigration policy in Canada, where we are both from. And it's like very much like a central thing. So anyway, it's just like to sort of like the sort of like references all get blurred in a way. But I think because we're talking about this history that's so interconnected, so it's hard to say like, okay, this comes from here and this comes from here. Like, it's always just like the sort of, like, as you're saying, like this kind of process of translation, because for us, I think once we start talking about one thing, we always then kind of move to the next, so like the dolphin did become the ship, became the sea, became the, yeah. And that's sort of like, and it's maybe the same with those, with the works on paper. In the Henry show, like we look at an archive, but it's like the questions that the archive elicits are just like so vast that like where we start is like never going to be where we end, but like somehow the starting point is still so important. So it's like, yeah, things get like kind of translated and retranslated into something else.
Great. We are getting some questions here. Maybe just because this is directed at, we can start with this idea of translation. I'm not really sure what if there's more to this than a yes or no, but you are including myth with structural religions in your work.
Yeah, the question, because I don't think the attendees can see it, is are you including myth with structural religions? I think if I understand your question correctly, yes, we are. I don't know, do you want to say more things to add to that?
Yeah. No, I think that's really
okay. Cool. Yeah.
There's also a question about the voice of the fabulist versus the narrator and the plural voice on the screen. And this person's asking us to speak more about the choices of the characters and the voices you developed for the performance. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I think often when we write characters, they might not often seem like characters, but in this case, in this performance, we had four. We had the fabulist, who was Faraz, who is literally reading this fable, this like 10th century fable from around the Iraq, what would be now Iraq area. And it was very fable-like, and so fabulous he became. And then we have our narrator, Sukaina, who in very dry fashion narrates the other stories that we want to be telling. And just for those of you who don't know, she also narrates the film. So it was nice to have her come on board this project as well and behave in a similar way as that narrator. And then the other character was the Jinn, and the Jinn voice, which was the shared screen box that you saw, was a mix of Alexis and myself, and it was mixed by Richy, Carey, who also did the soundtrack for the film that we've worked with on numerous occasions now. And I think the idea, because the Jinn is multiple, and the Jinn is this shape-shifting being, that it made sense for Alexis and my voices to be incorporated into that. And then I guess the final voice would be the voice of the text, like the images that we created with the text on screen. And I think that voice felt a little more outside of the direct performance, but it was just another way for us to wrap in a different kind of imagery and a different kind of way of, like, I guess, structuring the performance. So we're often, yeah, I guess like none of these.
It was also like it was also a way to think about water as form too. So like, given that it was a more poetic voice, we could think about like, yeah, the sort of like formal aspects of the sea in a way as well. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's good. That's good.
I think that's timestamp of 1254 in our chat, Alexis and Charlene, this idea that maybe I'll rephrase it asking about transitioning from prosecuting the animals, as in the trials that are included in Bugs and Beasts Before the Law, the film, to protecting them in the case of Perilous Jack, and thinking about this shift in the use of law for protecting animals. And I was also fascinated by, similarly, the shift from the prosecution of the animals in the film to the sort of trial of the human perpetrators in this, in dolphin ships and other vessels, with the sort of Jinn narrative. So I don't know if you want to address either of those, the form of the trial and its real material kind of prosecution and protection, the dual functions it plays.
Yeah, I think like when we look at kind of like grand records, so like I guess, you know, sort of legal trials, we sort of end up in this, I mean, and maybe we've created this dichotomy too, where we sort of see like a moment in time where like things kind of shifted in a way. But I think that's because like I think maybe what we're saying is like that things haven't really shifted in this way. Like there's always been moments throughout history where like the law has protected objects, things over humans. And so like to us, it makes sense that at this moment, you know, that like in this particular example, that the state is like super interested in protecting this specific dolphin, and surely it had something to do with like it's kind of like militaristic protections of its borders around that time as well. So yeah, I guess I think it hasn't really shifted all that much in thinking about like, I don't think the law has shifted in thinking about like prosecuting animals at a certain point, or sorry, prosecuting, yeah, animals at a certain point to protecting them. In a way, it's like always kind of, it's just sort of shifts its focus depending on like what's happening in the world at that time, and what like, you know, the state deems to like be in need of protection. So the law kind of is this sort of very amorphous thing, like the Jinn. The more evil Jinn. Sissy, did you have something to
No,
add
I'm
to
thinking
that?
about all the different ways that laws are structured now, and I don't know how to, because the case with Polaris Jack, and this is, I think, the part that we also found interesting, is that there was this like belovedness for this one dolphin that would protect the ships from its passage from the North and South Island of New Zealand. And the beloved factor of this dolphin was also one of the reasons that the law was passed. But you can't, at the time, I think now probably too, but you couldn't pass an act just for a single, and like one single dolphin. You had to pass it for a certain amount of, like they had to be like Sea Fisheries Act. So it wasn't the Polaris Jack Act. It was the Sea Fisheries Act of New Zealand, therefore protecting all dolphins in the area. So but it came out of a need of like love, or some weirdness, some weird like desire to protect this one dolphin. And then the story of the dolphin disappearing is that the Norwegian fishing boat that didn't understand the law and the love of this dolphin shot at the dolphin because it seemed like it was attacking the boat when it was actually leading it to safety. So it's funny to think about how the laws are structured. They sometimes seem so arbitrary, and also I don't know, like are isolated within certain places, which I think was interesting for us to also examine within this project.
Maybe we should think about one more question. I'm just looking across the different functions here. Do you want to answer this about the meaning of the Japanese word ship name?
We hadn't looked into that, but it is interesting. So somebody is just sort of mentioning that they did a quick Google transliteration or translation of the word komakata, and it means those who squeeze, or communal. Yeah, so I guess that the vessel. Yeah, and then there's a question about contemporary Ingrid. Ingrid Pollard is asking a question about the contemporary judgment against bats, pigs, and birds in relation to the articulations around the present pandemic and its spread around the planet by air, sea, and flight. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think this moment is like sort of rife for paying attention to the kinds of narratives that the sorts of ways in which we might, or the world might, start creating laws around, or probably definitely have already, around certain kinds of animals and how they move or don't move. But I don't have something specific to say about that at the moment. Do you, Shar?
No.
I mean, I think a good place a lot of these are bringing up more questions that probably invite more questions for you. And this project, and maybe a place to conclude, is very rhizomatic and has already manifested in so many different forms, and has been the result of years of research and conversation and work. And I guess maybe you can say if there is the next thread at which you are going to pull on this project, and where it might take you.
Well, I think
Obsessed
that
with the dolphin.
we're obsessed with the dolphin. So now we're going down the dolphin route. No, I think that working on this project actually has opened up space for us to think how else we can delve into thinking about maritime law and maybe more dolphin things. And also just to kind of expand upon what we have presented today, because it felt, for a Zoom medium, for a short performance, if we felt like we could go into many, many different places. And I think that this presented just a short sample of where we're going to go, but I think we're just in the beginning of a research process. I don't know, maybe another film in 5 years.
With that, thank you all for joining us today, and please join us at the Henry before May 9th to see the installation. And also the film is available, Bugs and Beasts Before the Law, to screen from the Henry's website until 11:30 p.m. Pacific.
Cool. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you,
And thanks,
everybody.
Nina, for
Yeah, of
Thanks,
course.
Nina.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.